realized it had been a while since I last talked about an Agatha Christie adaptation, but the wait is now over. I'm not sure if anyone was waiting, but regardless, I'm here to talk about Murder in Mesopotamia. This is an episode of Agatha Christie's Poirot that I've been planning to review for a while because of the importance it holds in the series. I subtitled this video The End of an Era, and I'm sure you know what I mean, but I'll get to it if you don't. It was the second and last episode of Season 8. Seasons 7 and 8 were both very short, each consisting of 2 feature-length episodes. The gap between Seasons 6 and 7 had been the longest hiatus between seasons so far, with Season 6 ending in 1996 and the show not returning until the year 2000, when it kicked off with the Murder of Roger Ackroyd. Each of these episodes probably should get their own video, but I'd like to briefly track the progression of the show as it led towards the shift that marked its last 5 seasons. The Murder of Roger Ackroyd is a very good episode, and to my recollection, a fairly good adaptation of the novel. Of course, it's nearly impossible to pull off the reveal that the novel did, considering the movie can't be narrated in the same way, but they managed to give us a fun, fairly action-packed finale, complete with a gunfight, clambering around on catwalks, and the sight of Poirot angrily gardening near the beginning is also a lot of fun. Lord Edgware Dies came next, and is also quite good. If I had to choose between it and the Peter Ustinov version, 13 at Dinner, I would take Peter Ustinov's take on the story. It's quite eccentric, and you even get David Suchet thrown in there too. Yes, I know he was by no means a fan of his own performance, but I still like it. The parts that I think work best from Lord Edgware Dies, though, are those where they lean into the nostalgia and love that audiences have for the familiar characters and locations. For instance, the scene where Poirot returns to his flat in London. Audiences hadn't seen that location, and David Suchet in it, for several years, and it works great. Also, the scene of Poirot, Japp, Hastings, and Miss Lemon having supper and reminiscing is wonderful as well. So while the rest of the episode might not be top-tier Poirot, those moments stand out to me. And then we come to Evil Under the Sun, the first episode of Season 8. I love this one. Unpopular opinion alert, I think it's far better than the Peter Ustinov movie, but that's just me. It has such a great tone with some humor, as is usual, but with a dark undercurrent of suspicion running throughout. David Suchet really plays it up perfectly, getting some excellent moments as he utters an ominous line as the camera pushes in on him. The whole sequence at El Ranchero is fun, with Hastings the continual sad sack, having lost money on bad deals, until Poirot's health incident. There's the scene at the hospital, which I particularly enjoy, where we see really the only family that Poirot has, standing by his bedside to watch over him. Miss Lemon is utilized so well, given an investigative job to do, and the final scene is perfect. Our quartet of favorites are all together, Poirot tells a not terribly funny joke, and they all smile and laugh quietly as we fade to credits. It's for that reason alone, combined with it being a fantastic episode, that I wish they would have flipped the order of Murder in Mesopotamia and Evil Under the Sun. Jumping ahead a little, I don't think Murder in Mesopotamia has the satisfying ending it should for being the last chapter with the classic cast and in the style this show had established for itself until years later. But either way, this was the last time we would see the Big Four, pun intended, all together on screen for quite a few years, and it's a wonderful ending. But now we come back to Murder in Mesopotamia, the episode that I claimed I was here to review. It's an episode that I remember quite vividly watching back when it first aired. The vivid part comes from one moment involving the mask tapping at the window. It frightened a certain other member of my family quite a lot, so much so that I don't remember what my reaction was to it. That may have been the last time I watched this episode, because the rest of it felt quite unfamiliar to me upon this viewing. As an adaptation of the novel, it's fine. There are some changes made that I really don't think add very much to it, which I'll get into. I'm also not a big fan of the novel itself, though. Certain elements feel like they come out of nowhere, and the pacing of this adaptation makes them seem even more so. The story surrounds the murder of the wife of an archaeologist. Poirot is called in to help, and he sets about investigating the other members of the archaeology team. The adaptation starts off with a murder, right off the bat. One that doesn't feel connected to the later murder of Mrs. Leidner, for good reason. The resolution to that feels offhanded later, and disconnected from the rest of the case. The whole opening act feels rushed to me, and again, compounds the problem of seemingly random elements being tossed in near the beginning. There's the man peeking through the window while Hastings and Mrs. Leidner look on, within sight of him. Oh yes, Hastings has been added to the story as well, where in the novel Poirot is unaccompanied. And Hastings is now the uncle to the William Coleman character, whose adoption by Hastings' sister does add an element of mystery to Coleman's past that I liked. There's also the tense atmosphere that permeates the group. In the novel, this is established quite well, as it's mentioned right from the get-go and enhances every interaction. In the movie, it's largely left to one dinner scene, where everyone sits around awkwardly. It feels forced and not like a naturally occurring atmosphere based on these characters. Another change is that Poirot is present immediately, not called in much later after the murder has been committed. This isn't a surprise. The audience is largely there to see David Suchet at work, so they can't very well delay his entrance until the second act. But it does come at the expense of the nurse Leatherand character. The book is written from her perspective, and that was something that I did not enjoy for very long while reading. While Agatha Christie's writing in this apparently inexperienced author's style is fun at first, after a while it did grate on me. The character herself is fine and is a nice assistant for Poirot, but the way in which she narrates this story felt lacking to me. But again, in the movie she is sidelined for much of the running time, as Poirot witnesses many of the events himself that he is just told about in the book. And one last thing about the opening act, Barbara Barnes' performance as Mrs. Leidner did not convey the sense of fear and paranoia that I think this character needs. This is a woman that has apparently been living in terror of a phantom stalking her across countries and over decades. And the Mrs. Leidner we see seems to be instead just an ill-tempered, wealthy woman that can turn her panic on and off. The way that she suddenly blurts out her whole past felt very clumsy in a storytelling way, having to rush through all these years and events in a quick montage. But once we get past Mrs. Leidner's murder, I think the movie gets considerably better. The pace slows down somewhat, and we're given the time to somewhat get to know the rest of the characters. I won't get into too many details to avoid the main spoilers of this story. For the rest of the cast, I think they're all quite good. Dinah Stabb is very good as the spiteful and protective Mrs. Johnson, and Alexei K. Campbell is really great as Mercado, particularly in the scene where he's trying to remember his alibi for the time of Mrs. Leidner's murder. Of course, he's hiding his own secrets, but I won't get into that here. But throughout, David Suchet is, as usual, excellent in the role. His dissatisfaction with his Iraqi accommodations is quite funny, his fear of mosquitoes as well, and seeing Poirot in exotic locales is always a treat. Hugh Fraser as well is good, but the Poirot and Hastings dynamic felt a little off to me. They don't share many fun moments, and most of their scenes together revolve around Poirot's expectantly waiting for Countess Vera Rosikoff to reappear after having vanished, and Poirot getting irritated every time Hastings tries to question him about her or comfort him. Perhaps the show as a whole felt like they'd wrung the life out of the Poirot and Hastings relationship, which may have contributed to the changes which were on the horizon, and basing off of how they're written this time around, maybe they were right. While I would have loved this series to continue inserting Jap and Miss Lemon and Hastings into stories for the duration of its seasons, if this is an example of how that might have played out, maybe it's better they didn't. The sense of fun is largely missing from their moments together, and I think that's really too bad. The episode itself does still have some humor, which I'm all in favor of course, but that spark that enlivened Poirot and Hastings as a duo isn't quite there. There is one moment that stood out, and it's not even played for a laugh. Poirot accidentally uses the word welded, and Hastings corrects him to use the word wielded. It's such a small moment, but the way that Hastings just throws it in and Poirot accepts the correction without embarrassment or making a big deal out of it demonstrates the history and comfort these characters share. Getting back to the Countess Rosikoff subplot, I'm really not sure why that was added. I believe she was introduced back in Season 3 during the Double Clue episode, but Murder in Mesopotamia plays it like we're following up on something that occurred in just the last episode. It's meant to explain Poirot's presence in Baghdad, where it would have been simpler to just have him having finished up a case. This subplot is brought up continually, and then sort of ends without any real resolution in the last scene. It felt weirdly out of place, and without even an appearance from the character herself, leaves the episode on a bit of a shrug. I feel like I keep veering into parts of this one that I didn't like, so here are a few things that I thought really worked. The mask in the window is still a creepy image, especially in the first shot we get of it. A later murder that is achieved by a hydrochloric acid is shocking, and more graphic than this series normally gets. The whole scene is tense and very well done, and gives David Suchet the opportunity to play Poirot in more of a panic than he normally does. Poirot is typically either very composed, quietly annoyed, or vehemently reprimanding a suspect. This scene of him trying to comfort someone who's dying while clearly in shock himself adds a new layer to him that I think works very well. The finale, and in particular the scene showing how the murder of Mrs. Leidner was carried out, was excellent. It's a visceral killing that is shot really well, and Poirot's explanation and accusations might be standard stuff, but I thought it was well handled. The main twist, though, I had a hard time buying it in the novel, and I do here as well. It depends on Mrs. Leidner completely forgetting everything about her first husband. His face, his voice, everything about him. Yes, they only knew one another for a very brief time, and this was 20 years ago. But if you've been scared by the possible reappearance of this person for so long, I feel like you would be on the lookout for any similarity to that person. The flashback we see also confirms that he hasn't changed looks all that much over the last 2 decades, so it's a stretch. There I go being negative again. But the cinematography, this is where Murder in Mesopotamia really stands out. The Tunisia locations are great, with the archaeological dig site, the ruins, scenes teeming with extras. It all gives such scale to the episode. And those shots at sunset with the cast given this warm, golden glow while playing their scenes with the desert stretching out behind them are all really beautiful. And while the episode doesn't open with the classic Christopher Gunning theme, there is an Arabic-inspired take on it used during the episode that brought a smile to my face instantly. But the last moment of the movie, I'm sorry, but I did not like it at all. The last line of dialogue delivered by Poirot is, "Do not speak, Hastings." And then they walk away as the credits roll. I'm guessing they didn't know how the series would change in the coming years at this point, but just think, those are the last moments on screen between David Suchet and Hugh Fraser for nearly 5 seasons and 11 years. After all the episodes and wonderful banter they'd shared since 1989, this is how it was left for far too long. It was the end of an era, and feels like a sour note to me. And that's why I wish they would have held Evil Under the Sun for last, as I was mentioning earlier. That one had the whole gang together and ending on a pleasant little exchange, but that's not what happened. This installment of the series is almost equal parts good and questionable decisions. There is a lot to enjoy, but there's a fair bit that didn't work for me. I'm not sure how the rest of the Poirot fan community feel about this one, but it felt like a lesser entry. Despite that, it still had Hugh Fraser, David Suchet still had that twinkle in his eye, and the show was still comfortable with letting some humor in to lighten up the mystery. Would I recommend it? It's not perfect, but anything in this series' first 8 seasons is worth watching, so I'd say yes. So as I head into the later years of Agatha Christie's Poirot, I'm very curious about how I'll feel about them now. There are a lot of them that I've never seen, and those that I have were all a long time ago. Will I see something that I'd missed previously and discover there was some merit in the changes that were made to this beloved series? Or will I still find the dour, dramatically heavy episodes that reside in the back of my memory? We shall see. Thanks so much for watching my review. If you enjoyed it, I hope you'll check out some more of my reviews on Hildebrand Productions. Thanks again, and adios for now.